Today's speaker is Hillary Rayport. Hillary is the chair of the Nantucket Historical Commission. Prior to her work in preservation, Hillary was a venture capital investor in both New York and London. She was vice president of Cytal Software, a data analytics company focused on the biomedical industry. She was also an investment consultant with Cambridge Associates, where she advised museums, foundations, and private clients on their investment portfolios. Hillary holds a BA in English from Princeton and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Hillary is a trustee of the Nantucket Athenaeum, co-produced the Nantucket Memoir Project, and has been a director of numerous nonprofit cultural organizations. She and her husband, Jeffrey, and their two young sons live in Boston and in a 1748 home on Nantucket. So let's give Hillary a warm Rotary welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks. I'm so sorry that we can't all be together in person, but thank you so much for tuning in to Zoom to hear some remarks about the Historical Commission. I'm honored to be a guest here with the Rotarians, and hearing the pledge, being able to say the pledge takes me back to grade school, the public school that I went to, and also reminds me, why we preserve things, why we have a system of preservation in America. I think preservation is deeply patriotic, to understand our history and our culture and what's important in our communities and in our country. And it just also reminded me that, the whole preservation movement started out of an interest in the colonial history. The first preserved space that wasn't a battlefield was George Washington's birthplace. So yeah, there's a deep connection to topics, I think, that overlap with the Rotarians. So I just wanted to mention that. So yeah, hearing my background in bio and Janet reading it, I have this business background, but yet here I am really interested in preservation. And how did that happen? I mean, I think a lot of people start an interest in preservation as they put down roots and realize how meaningful certain objects and certain cultural landscapes can be that are around us all the time. But when one of them is threatened through a demolition or, a overtaking with inappropriate change, suddenly it wakens up our inner preservationist. And I would say that's definitely what happened to me. I've always been interested in stories. I was an English major. I studied Moby Dick. I wrote my thesis on Moby Dick, and then came to Nantucket. My husband family has a long history on Nantucket in the summers. His parents have been coming there since the 1950s. I grew up in Philadelphia and I vacationed on the Jersey Shore. But as I got more and more exposed to Nantucket, it really felt like the right place for me, and a place that just is very special, and it's unique. So as I started spending more and more time on Nantucket and becoming attached, especially to the architecture and the history of the built environment, I encountered the necessary renovation of the streetscape, which is very important for accessibility. But I also felt that it was important and possible to repair and preserve our streets in ways that recognized the artifacts in the street, which are the fingerprints of the people that came before us. That we have artifacts that are handmade. They were put there with purpose by really intelligent members of the community trying to also improve their accessibility in their community, and that Nantucket is increasingly unique in having this antique streetscape. If you look at old photos of Boston and Faneuil Hall, you see the very same types of stones, granite flagstone crosswalks, beach cobble streets. You see hand-hewn schist curbs that were created with steam tools, and they're all gone, and they're still there on Nantucket. Mostly because Nantucket had this long period of depression, and all of that stuff got to stay long enough that we started to appreciate it. And I felt that all of this could be adapted and rehabilitated to be accessible and yet still historic and unique. And that I felt that if I didn't, raise my hand and start speaking for these things, that they would go away. So that's how I became a more active preservationist and discovered that Nantucket didn't have a historical commission, but we had the ability to have one. And that maybe that would be something that I could do that would contribute to our community. And so that was a journey that I started 3 years ago now, and it's just been an incredible experience. I've met so many amazing people in the community, all types of people, and I feel that we've really made a difference. So with that as kind of a wind up, I just wanted to make sure that, before we move over to Q&A, that I was able to explain exactly what a historical commission is and how it differs from, a society, a historical society, and also how the historical commission differs from the historic district commission and how they work together. So I'm just going to share I'm just going to share my screen. There it is. And I just prepared just a few slides. So the Nantucket Historical Commission is a 7-person independent government commission responsible for preservation planning on Nantucket. The commission was created by a voted town meeting in 2005. So the state of Massachusetts general law that allows a town or a city to have a historical commission had to be adopted by the voters. That happened in 2005. The commission was active for a little while and then kind of went underground. It wasn't fully appointed. So we became more active when a group of 7 people applied to the select board in 2019 to be appointed. And so that happened in 2019, as I said, and we got busy thinking about, well, all right, now we're a commission, what do we do? Why are we here? And how do we operate ourselves in a professional and productive way? So our mission is to protect the National Historic Landmark of Nantucket. Nantucket was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1975. And it's recognized by the entity of the government that recognizes the landmark status is the Department of the Interior and the Park Service. We advise the select board and the community on matters of preservation, and we work with the town preservation planner, the planning director, other municipal groups to create plans and guidelines for historic preservation. We direct surveys of buildings and lands of archaeological and historical significance, and we advocate for historic preservation. I think it is important to understand that the historical commission, like our government in the United States, has a system for preservation, and we coordinate at a federal, a state, and a local level. So at the federal level, the body for historic preservation is the U.S. Park Service, part of the Department of the Interior. And the way we do preservation in America anyway is that we have a system of recognizing a physical thing as being historic. So this is recognized through the National Register of Historic Places, which is basically a list. It's like a credentialed list that the Park Service has ultimate authority to put a place or an object or a landscape on or not on. So they are called the keeper of the National Register of Historic Places. And they also provide technical assistance, guidance on preservation. Funding is a big part of this via grants and tax incentives. But from that federal level, everything is pushed down to the state, and the state in turn pushes things down to the local level because preservation is always local. So the Massachusetts Historical Commission is where the state historic preservation officer is employed. There's also a state archaeologist, and they maintain a statewide preservation plan. They recommend sites for listing on the National Register. They provide funding for preservation via grants and tax incentives. And they also do project review and compliance. So a very important legal tool that exists is the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, which says that the government of the United States will not use its own money to harm or adversely affect a historic resource that's listed on the National Register if it has any way of avoiding it. So this is how you get like local review of the wind farms, for instance. Anything that uses federal money is going to have a review for whether or not it adversely affects the historic resource. On the local level, we have a historical commission and we have a historic district commission. So how are they different and what do they do? So the Historical Commission does preservation planning. The most important thing of preservation planning are surveys. You can't preserve what you don't understand. So accurate surveys and documentation of historic resources, creating the island-wide preservation plan. How do we grow in a way that respects our historic resources? We advocate for preservation. We recommend policies and bylaws that are pro-preservation that could be adopted at town meeting. We write letters of recommendation when there's an application for a state historic preservation tax credit, which I can talk more about if that's interesting. We participate in these Section 106 reviews, which are those reviews of federally or state funded projects. And we do education when something we feel is not being covered by another group that also does preservation education. The Historic District Commission is the architectural review board. So they maintain the design standards, they issue certificates of appropriateness for work on buildings. They make historic determinations for the purposes of exceptions to building code. They enforce our minimum maintenance bylaw on Nantucket. And they also operate themselves. We do a lot of research and writing as part of our advocacy. We took our concern for the streetscape and we oversaw the creation of a preservation engineering study on historic cobblestone street paving, and we published a guide for the DPW and other contracted workers to refer to about how to preserve pavement. We thought it might be helpful to write about how to design a roundabout in a way that fits well into our historic town. And we also wrote a report on development opportunities at Harbor Place and preservation friendly zoning for that area. We had some educational initiatives last year. We project managed and organized the creation of this monument to Arthur Cooper, a resident of the Angola Street area. And here Dylan Fernandez, our state representative, tweeted about that. We are also launching training for realtors about preservation tax credits and selling historic homes. And that's going to hopefully be offered in person in partnership with NAREB in June of this coming year. It had to be postponed. So we have some goals. We're working on an island-wide survey of historic resources. We launched that last year with funding from the MHC and federal government. We'll continue to march through those surveys. We are seeking funding for a historic Main Street sidewalk restoration and rehabilitation study. And that has been, through our advocacy, increasingly important to the town, which has been wonderful to see. We're also spending a lot of time developing our relationship with the HDC and supporting and collaborating with them on matters of mutual concern. We have some new projects to look at the town-owned historic resources and have a preservation plan for those buildings. Spends a little bit more time on archaeological issues to understand what priorities might be important there. We're interested in town archives that might need to be identified and preserved, that are in boxes and files. So it's really an assessment process of what the archival needs are. And this idea that we have for a small loan fund concept, which I can talk more about. So that's my quick overview. I hope it was okay seeing all those slides and that you helped understand, it helped you understand that the Historical Commission is a municipal agency that with specific duties that are given to us by the federal and state government. It's based on surveying and researching historic resources and advocacy and planning. Yeah, and that's it. I'd love to hear any questions, have discussion.
Thanks, Hillary. Easiest way to do this is just show of hands if someone wants to start the process of any questions for Hillary. Janet?
Hi, Janet.
Well, I have another question, but the first one I wanted to ask, and you might have touched upon this and I missed it, but I know you were doing work with the coastal resiliency. Was that the commission that was working with them on, managing resiliency, but also maintaining the historic look and feel of Nantucket? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yes, and before I answer that, I just wanted to mention that we do meet. I should mention that we do meet on the third Friday of every month, and our meetings are posted open meetings. So you can sign up to be notified when we post an agenda. We're actually meeting this Friday, and we welcome guests. We always have almost always have a public comment on our agenda. So to answer the question about coastal resiliency, so our role as a commission is to be thinking about advocating and understanding impacts on historic resources. So with the coastal resiliency plan, we were certainly a stakeholder. We gave them feedback, and we also have a town preservation planner, Holly Bacchus, who is really the person on point with coordinating with the Coastal Resiliency Committee. They were very interested in our Harbor Place recommendations and study, Harbor Place Wilkes Square, because that area is obviously very vulnerable.
Other questions? Yeah.
I wanted you to talk about the article you're putting together regarding, I think it's transparency in the planning board. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about my article. It's a Citizens Warrant article, so it's not something I'm doing through my activities with the Historical Commission. But I've sponsored an article which, will have its opportunity to be voted up or down at town meeting, which makes some amendments to the language creating the Nantucket Planning Commission. So the purpose of the article is to amend the Planning Commission Special Act to make it more accessible for the voters to elect people to the Planning Commission. So right now our Planning Commission, which is responsible for all of the long range planning for Nantucket, both the physical, social, economic planning for Nantucket. It was set up 50 years ago, nearly 50 years ago now, coming up on its 50th anniversary, really to be insulated from politics and insulated from the public, to be more independent so that they could do very long range thinking. And the way they achieved that was to have the ability to appoint their own at-large members. And just as a citizen looking at planning, thinking about citizen and voter accountability and involvement, I think it's time that those 3 at-large seats be, that the voters be able to elect those people. I think we'll get a variety of different voices represented, more focus and attention on the Planning Commission and their work if the voters can elect the 3 at-large members instead of letting the commission appoint their own 3 at-large members. I've also made some I've suggested that the Historical Commission, which is preservation planning, long range preservation planning, have a seat, because the Planning Commission is kind of a board of boards. It's the one commission on Nantucket where many different groups can come together. You know, we talk about, oh, well, the town's really siloed, you know, we're a small community, people know each other, but yet we're kind of siloed. So this commission has representation from the planning board, the Concom, the select board, and I'm suggesting that it also have representation from the Historical Commission, because preservation planning is so important for a National Historic Landmark. And I think there's a lot of opportunity with getting you know, some more engagement from the voters, more accountability to the voters, for the commission to really work across sectors for that long range planning for the physical, social, economic benefit of the island. The article also inserts language into the special act that the commission should make an annual report, and makes that an obligation of the commission to report annually. So I really hope I can get some support from my article. Obviously I believe in it, so I hope I can convince other people to believe in it too.
Great. Brenda?
Oh, I can't hear you, Brenda.
Hi, can you tell me, you had made a comment about how people can get a tax credit. And I believe Holly had mentioned that to me at one point when we were discussing some house that was contributing. So how does that work?
Yeah, so there's a tax credit program that is offered by the federal government and also by the state government, which can give you up to 20%. Each program gives you up to 20% back of qualified rehabilitation expenses. The one kind of no-go decision that's really important to understand is that it's for income producing properties. So unfortunately, it's not a tax credit that you can take advantage of for your home. But if you have a rental property, or if you have a business that you use for income producing purposes, or if you're a nonprofit and it's, you know, your headquarters or your library or whatever, you can use it. And then the way, even though nonprofits don't pay taxes, there's an active market for selling these. People want to buy these tax credits because it helps them, they can reduce their own taxes by purchasing the tax credit from somebody else. They're tradable. So if your project is for an income producing purpose and it is a structure that's listed or eligible for listing on the state, the register, the National Register of Historic Places, then you can participate in the tax credit program.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we're happy through the commission or through Holly to point you in the direction. People usually work through consultants when they apply for these, because it's really important to understand that the existing condition has to be documented before you start your work. It's very hard if you've already started your work to actually take advantage of the tax credit program, but it can be really material. And you know, the Nantucket hotel used tax credits. The Flock knitting shop used tax credits. 21 Broad Street used tax credits. So people do use them. And some rental homes have used them.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Hillary. That's interesting. I know someone who is a consultant in that space, and
Oh, okay.
your 3-minute explanation made clearer than I've sat and chatted with him for a long time and
Oh,
made it as clear as that. So thank you for that.
he
Now I know
probably
what he
knows.
does.
He probably knows a lot more about it than I do, which makes it more complicated to explain.
Can you talk a little bit about the loan fund? I'd be interested to hear
Oh,
about
the
it.
loan fund. Yeah. So I think this is a great idea. So tax credits can help folks that have income producing properties, but what about people who own a historic home and struggle to maintain it? The historic homes have a lot of, they're constantly rotting, right? And they're constantly needing to be painted, and they need a lot of maintenance. So I heard about this program from the town of Arlington, and I thought it might be a really good thing to set up on Nantucket. Arlington, Massachusetts, established 30 years ago a small loan fund. I think they got $100,000 from a community development block grant, and they partnered with a bank. And the purpose of the loan is so that homeowners who have smaller repairs, like in the tens of thousands, I think like $1,000 to $30,000 or something, so a smaller repair, and need a little help getting it, financing it, they can apply to the town through this public-private partnership, and they get a low interest loan to help them achieve their repair. And they are responsible for paying the loan back, but it's a very low interest loan. And they make it easy to apply for. And it's really just a way for towns to make it easier for homeowners to keep their homes up. And when historic homes are kept looking good and in good repair, they're going to last. So it's in everybody's interest. So my thought actually is that we could potentially set something like this up if we had seed funding for it. And I'm speaking kind of off the cuff here because I haven't tested this concept, but Nantucket is expecting to have a fund. We're expecting to receive funding from the Vineyard Wind project, which funding is being given as mitigation for the adverse effects that the wind farms have on our landmark. Some people aren't happy about that because they feel that it's not nearly enough money to pay for the adverse effect. But the fund is going to be set up at the community foundation. And when that is set up and they have the board and everything all settled, it's not settled yet, but when it is settled, my hope is that our commission could apply to receive seed funding for this preservation loan fund. There's a lot of work that has to happen before this comes in. Like, we can dream. I would love to hear reactions to that. If people think it's something Nantucket would use, thumbs up, thumbs down. I don't know. What do you think?
How much money did you get? I remember this whole argument about, the impairment of the historic district from the view plane of 200 wind turbines, 15 miles offshore or whatever. But I don't recall how much money Nantucket was going to get as a mitigation of this same thing. So
the mitigation fund is quite large. The number that I remember for Nantucket is around $4 million, which is a lot of money. $4 million can go very far with maintaining historic resources on Nantucket, I think. If I follow up on that and find that the number is very different, I will email Janet because I don't want to leave you all with the wrong information.
To your question, Hillary, about would people be interested in seeing a loan fund? I mean, I see only good can come from it. Sounds like a lot of work, and I wonder how it would be. I guess some combination of your commission and the town would have to administer it along with a bank, but sounds like it's a good resource for people who, if they're in that position, need some help. And it is in the town's interest to maintain properties like that, right? To help people do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think my impression is that there are a lot of people on Nantucket, especially because, you know, we didn't talk about the what buildings are stored. People think, oh, Nantucket, it's a 18th century whaling village, but Nantucket's period of significance culturally, and this is a term of art that's used when you're placed on the National Register. When a historic district is designated, it's always with an understanding of what is considered significant and worth saving about that area. For Nantucket, it's actually includes the period up till 1975. And the reason for that is that the preservation movement of the 60s and 70s, really, actually, I would say it was 1930 through 1975, was so important culturally on Nantucket and so unusual and so strong that, you know, not every building, but buildings that were created with this preservation revivalist, creating the modern resort that we know as Nantucket today, those buildings are considered contributing. So it's actually quite a lot of buildings. And there are a lot of people who live in, you know, these not super, super old, but definitely not new homes, and maybe could use a little help maintaining them. I don't know how many people that is. And, you know, putting on my MBA hat, we might want to spend a little bit of time figuring out the size of the market, because it is going to be a lot of work to set up this loan fund.
Thank you. Any additional questions for Hillary?
Cozy?
Sorry, I couldn't help but wonder, with the Citizens Warrant article that you have put out, where do you expect objections to come from? I mean, why wouldn't we all want more transparency in an annual report? Would it only be from people who are sitting on the commission and don't want to have that sort of magnifying glass on what they do?
Well, you know, I think this is why we have a process of public hearings. So the Finance Committee is charged with looking at citizens warrants and creating a forum where anyone in the community can write to them with a question or come and talk about something that maybe I haven't thought of. But I think that this is something everybody would want. I mean, why? There are nowhere commissions that appoint their own members. I mean, commissions are typically appointed. Appointing authority is the select board, and or they're elected. You know, we have a harbor and shellfish advisory board, and I'm saying hello to Tom there, and they're all elected. Our HDC is elected. It's actually very unusual. It's the only HDC in the state of Massachusetts that is elected. So I really can't think of any reason why, but I'm sure there's something I haven't thought of. So stay tuned. We'll hear what people have to say. I don't know. Can you think of any reason? I'd love to hear reasons if anybody has a thought, something I'm not thinking of.
I think you're spot on. Carl, did you have a question?
Yes, I was on here at Surfside in the old section, and we do have a landmark, that is the old Surfside Life Saving Station. More recently, of course, it says slightly different lifetime, but if we go back to when I was first here, it was still the life saving station, and it has now been acquired by Blue Flag, and presumably they're going to do something, but there's been no word out yet as to what that something might be. I'm wondering if the life saving station falls under your purview in terms of the historic commission, and if you have any thoughts about what might or might not happen to that.
Sure. So so the life saving station is really in, I think, quite a safe position because it is covered by a preservation restriction. And preservation restrictions are kind of the gold standard for protecting cultural resources. They're put in place voluntarily by homeowners who decide, you know, my home or my property is significant. It's historic. I don't want it to change. And when I sell it, I still don't want it to change. So if you feel that way about your property or your home, you can put a preservation restriction on it, and it actually runs with the deed. It's like an encumbrance. It runs with the deed, and it can't be taken away. Someone has to be willing to hold the restriction, and then on Nantucket, that organization is typically the Nantucket Preservation Trust. They decided to develop this idea on Nantucket, and people did a bunch of work to start their program. So they hold the preservation restriction on the life-saving station. They have a right to inspect it, and that preservation restriction will call out certain features that must be preserved. So of course, on Nantucket, we have the Historic District Commission that reviews changes, but that's only the exterior. And a preservation restriction can go on important interior features of a building, and also on the property. So I don't know. I don't know what Blue Flag's plans are for that that building, but it is protected by a matter of law and contract. That preservation restriction was put in place in exchange for community preservation funds that were given to the Hosteling America, or the Youth Hostel organization, for repair and maintenance of that building. That's why it had, and in an exchange. So I think the town, the taxpayers of Nantucket, who contribute most of the funding for the community preservation fund, gave money to the hosteling of the youth hostel, and in exchange, we as a community received this preservation grant that preserves the property. That was the exchange. Of course, no one expected that they would sell it, but it didn't restrict that.
So it's been sold, and so far it's been just used temporarily for the lifeguards as a summer home for them. But clearly that's not a profit-making thing for Blue Flag. So
yeah, the restriction doesn't make changes on the use. So you know they're not restricted in how they use it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other questions for Hillary?
Vince, could I make a comment? This is Dick Phelan.
Yeah, please.
Okay, as you may know that the Phelan family owns a fairly large tract on Pleasant Street, which is vacant space. And last year it was honored by the Preservation Trust for a stewardship award on that property. A portion of that property, which we called the Ivy Patch, which was between the little house and the house that sits in the field. As some of you may have noticed by driving by it in the last week or so, that a lot of the trees in that Ivy Patch have been cut down. So I want to lay to rest any fears that that property is going to be developed. In fact, what's going to happen is, back in the early 1900s, there was actually a formal garden in that area that was written up in Home and Gardens. And we've got an article, we've got the original article. And it's what the family is going to attempt to do over a period of a couple of years, is to bring that back to the condition that it was back in the early 1900s. And that is a formal Irish garden. So we're not building any buildings in that area. And as many people may think that as a result of cutting all the trees down, which were deemed to be in very poor condition anyhow, and they would have died and either fallen down or had to be cut down anyhow. So it's what we are doing is advancing the process, and then they'll bring in about a foot of topsoil and then start planting trees and bushes to try to recapture the garden as it was back in the early 1900s.
Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And hopefully that puts any questions to rest.
Yeah, well, that's what I was afraid, that people would drive by and they would say, oh my gosh, now that another piece of property that's going to be developed, but that's not the case.
Super. Thank you. Yes, applause for that. Any other questions? Where we are kind of closing in on a little bit before 1, and I do want to wrap this up. First, Hillary, thank you so much for speaking to us today and being with us. As I mentioned at the outset, you know, when we're back in person, I hope you'll come. Normally, we'd be handing you a pin and buying you a lunch today, so you have that for whenever you can join us in person at a weekly meeting.
Thank you so much, Ben. Yeah, I'll take a rain check on the meal, but it's been really nice company, and thank you so much.